Jackie and Michiel, I just wanted to welcome you to the Ultra Habits podcast. It's 8:30 p.m. here in Australia. Where are you two joining me from? Jackie, maybe I'll start with you.
Thank you, RJ, for having us. It's great to be here. I'm joining today from Luxembourg, which means it's Central European time. It's about 1:45 here in the afternoon.
I'm in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. So, same time zone as Jackie. Different place.
It's truly international interview we got going. So I came across your article in the HBR, and I read many different articles, and it did catch my eye. You know, the article was talking about how we can all become more adaptable in challenging situations. Jackie, how did you and Michiel come, across this work? Like, what actually got you interested in this particular type of work in this subject?
Oh, thank you for that question, RJ. I will let Michiel answer for himself, but we were both in different areas before. We just found each other on this journey, but before we started to write together, I have already done work in the area of emotional flexibility and authentic confidence. And that had to do with my own personal journey and my struggles with anxiety, which I've had my whole life. And I reached a point where I actually wanted to do something about it. And I've done a TED Talk on it. I've written a lot about it. But I come from that angle, and because of that, I also have studied the neuroscience behind anxiety and adaptability extensively the last couple of years.
Michiel?
Yeah, for me, I mean, the reason why I think we wrote the article and the book is because all the writers basically have been very engaged for the past decades in helping executive teams go through business change, typically transformational change. And what we often find is that when the going gets tough in the boardroom, the vision gets narrower and the space contracts instead of expands. So the purpose of this book was actually a lot of our clients asked us to, why don't you write a book about it? Because it's so powerful, and we hear so little about this in our roles, is actually to bring more awareness that you can do much more to manage yourself, your emotional state, your awareness, and help others in that as well, in your role as a business professional or executive.
Jackie, in terms of the executives that you guys have come across and work on or either research, like, I would imagine that as an executive, particularly one that's gone into the boardroom, they would have developed a sense of managing themselves. Is that true? Like, in the main, do you find that at an executive level, there's a high percentage of people that have a good ability to manage themselves, or does it get just as messy as any other scenario?
Well, RJ, I have no doubt that executives in the boardroom have mastered many things, otherwise they can't get into the boardroom. At the same time, you would be surprised about the huge amount of opportunity when it comes to these skills. So it doesn't always mean that you've mastered these particular set of skills that we describe in the book to come in the boardroom. And I think everybody from boardroom to factory floor can benefit from them. And so there is a huge opportunity. And what we also see is, some have a talent and a tendency to be naturally more advanced in this space than others. But I think everybody can still learn a lot.
In comparison to other high-performing areas, right? Whether you look at athletics or sports, or even more in the space of art, the high performers are much more used to actually manage their inner self and trained to do so. When you grow up in the business world, we know it's getting more and more attention, right, lately. I think also because the speed of change is so incredible that you almost have to get much better at managing your awareness Otherwise, you just miss a lot of signals around you and in you. But the business world has been deprived of training in personal mastery. If you compare it to other high-performing sectors, if you like.
Michiel, do you think that's because, do you think traditionally leadership was much more top-down, and people were able to get into positions of power and hold authority without necessarily having to be graceful in terms of how they operated? Do you think that the business context is changing in terms of leadership and what's expected of leaders, and possibly looking at, concepts like shared leadership and having that kind of ability to delegate versus a kind of command style of leading? Do you think that's changed over time and pushed the agenda forward in terms of leaders starting to look at their behavior and how they operate?
Yeah, for sure. I think one is the business world has become more and more complex. So the all-knowing CEO is not around anymore, right? It's very hard to know all the answers. The all-powerful executive is there was a little bit something of the 90s. That's definitely gone, right? So there's much more awareness about the need for teamwork. There's a much bigger emphasis on innovation, and people are much more aware that we're running into a decade that has so many unknowns that it's good to not only live with answers, but also live with questions as a leader.
Jackie, you talk about emotional adaptability. What is that?
It builds a bit on what Michiel just pictured, that you have to be, as leaders in this new environment or the fast-changing environment and the complex world, you don't know all the answers, which leads to this, it can lead to feeling uncomfortable, because it basically means you're not always in control. And as human beings, we like to be in control. Then we feel comfortable. And the adaptability has everything to do with becoming comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing everything and all emotions that come with that, and yet keep an open mind and a learning mind and a way of moving forward, so that you can basically adapt and change whilst under pressure. And we explain that in the book as well, where we basically set the whole book is set up around a very simple framework, where we talk about the situation of today in the business world, or also in general. Leaders and people find themselves more often in high stakes and familiar situations. And in those situations, it's hard to do that because emotions get in the way, because we like to feel comfortable, and we talk about that as there is a paradox, basically, because in those situations, the best thing to do is to keep an open mind and to stay flexible. And so that is the flexibility has everything to do with not getting hooked or not getting stuck because of negative emotions and discomfort, but staying open and being able to continue to move forward even when it's tough.
Jackie, how did, you talked about, your interest in this work being, stemming from your own challenges with anxiety. How has emotional kind of inflexibility played out in your life, in your career, in a negative sense?
Well, it ended well, because the lemons that I got, I turned into lemonade. But when it started to become negative was when I've had moments where I actually very much felt like that I needed to have the perfect answer to everything all the time. And that's to me, holding back information or being afraid to say that I don't know everything or to ask for help. And that is not very smart, because then you can't learn and you can't collaborate and you can't move forward. So that got me stuck.
It's an interesting one. I mean, Michiel, maybe you can talk about some of these reflections here that we're having, particularly, in the world of high performance in business. I think that when we can have fast answers and answers always available, we're looked at as we're smart and capable, and you develop that trusted advisor status. And I think it's a very difficult place to be in, particularly when you're at the board room and, you may not know something, and to have that ability or that vulnerability to say you don't know and to be open, that's challenging. So I think this is where deliberate calm comes in, right? Our ability to kind of hold space for our fears and I suppose our internal reactions in the face of what's coming up and respond effectively. Is that the kind of?
I think partly so, right? So I think there is definitely in the practice of deliberate calm, you will expand your capacity to hold discomfort without reacting, right? Without trying to push it away with quick fixes. The other thing that it allows you to do, and I think that's one that we run into a lot. A lot of the people that are in executive teams and a lot of companies that are successful, they have found their formula, or they have found a way of doing business, and they have kind of like gotten into the grain of that. And we're now very often seeing clients that trying to apply that success formula to a situation that's different from the past. And I think what deliberate calm invites you to do is to actually ask yourself, is the challenge that we're facing now fit to our past success formula? Or do we need to open up and innovate? Do we need to open up and change and look at things differently? And that's where the reactive patterns where companies and executives and people, they sometimes miss the future because they try to repeat old success models all the time.
Is this, this deliberate calm, I would imagine, works much better and much more effectively when the whole team is on the journey, right? Like where you are creating a space where it's kind of becomes part of the culture and thread of the company, I would imagine. Like, do you guys find, and Jackie, maybe I'll point this question to you, that executives can implement this in isolation, or is it generally more effective if it becomes part of the DNA of, the leadership team or the company?
It's a great question, RJ. And I love that question because in the book we also spend time on describing deliberate calm for teams. But I think there's two sides of the same very valuable coin here. The reason why I did my work on authentic confidence and deliberate calm builds on a lot of that is that I wanted to learn personally, and also I wanted to help people personally to become effective irrespective of what environment they find them in. And not denying that context is extremely important as well. There is a lot that you can do to empower yourself. And our research shows that, and my research also has showed that. I've published on that. However, that said, I think if you can combine both sides, so you bring the culture and the team environment and the organizational environment together with the individual capacity to practice and to also lead a deliberate calm, that potentially leads to a winner. Because, it feeds off of each other. That's exactly the orchestra that you want to create. And we see a lot of evidence and reasons to believe that this is true. Also in research that I've done with the McKinsey Health Institute, of which I'm part, to employee burnout and well-being, where we very clearly saw that there are a lot of people in distress around the globe. The numbers are quite high. But we also see what drives that is toxic behavior and cultures that are not supportive. And so if you could create a culture of inclusion and psychological safety, which automatically relates to deliberate calm, then that would lead to well-being, better performance. And if you add then the individual skills, I mean, that is still something that I would personally want to do further research too, but it's absolutely something I strongly believe in, and all the points of evidence, all the evidence that I've seen point in the direction of exactly that. So, yes, as an individual, you can benefit a lot from this work, but of course, it's also important to bring that to the teams. That's the work that also we do, because this work brings also a way of talking about these topics, a way of language, common language, into the boardroom or in the team room or wherever in the organization, which helps to actually practice it in day-to-day life.
So maybe to make this practical, RG, what we do a lot with teams, that we always introduce this concept of learning versus protection. But when you are in protection, you're typically not aware that you're in protection, by the way, but that you are actually contracted and you are defending your own opinion, your old habits. You're basically unconsciously unwilling to change. And when you're in learning, you're more open. You're willing to shift your mind. You're willing to learn. You're willing to grow. You're willing to listen, etc. But we introduce those two states, and we explain to people you can never be 100% in learning. Because whenever you come into an uncertain environment, we're actually wired to get into a state of protection. Now, what great teams do, and that we help them train that in themselves, is that when they learn to recognize the moments when they tend to go into protection, which are the moments where it actually really matters. Because the more important the topic and the higher the uncertainty, the more we are wired to get into protection. So they learn to recognize those moments, and they learn ways to support each other to move to learning, to actually relax the body, relax the mind, relax the atmosphere, and then go back to the difficult topic.
Yeah,
that's very powerful.
I take Jackie's point on board. I think, we all have to be the change we want to see, and as an individual, we have to have the courage to be authentic, to be vulnerable, and by kind of modeling the right behaviors, hopefully we set the pace for others. I think also to Jackie's point, psychological safety does make that environment much easier to kind of implement things like vulnerability, like openness, to have a learning mindset. So I think that as an individual, I have to, or I should want to have the courage to be vulnerable, to be open, and hopefully that will inspire others around me to do so. So I want to talk about the Deliberate Calm Leadership Program. So let's say someone has engaged you guys to introduce the program in an organization. Like, where do you start? Like, how do you start to even understand the context of the organization? How healthy they are from a cultural perspective, how open they are, how closed they are. Jackie, maybe I'll hand this to you to kind of talk about what do you do to really assess where you're at?
So that is a dynamic process. We have different ways of doing this work with organizations, and one can be highly tailored and really integrated within a transformational change process. But we also have a quite standard set of skills where actually the change is driven from a number of modules that we take the participants through, and then it comes alive through that process. And we've done that very successfully, both in digital formats. I mean, we have a case study that we also researched in a randomized, in a control trial, basically, where we had a couple of thousand people doing this program, and we used multi-rater feedback before and after, which means that we asked a couple of questions from the participants, but also from people that they work with. And so they went through the program, 30 minutes a week, virtual program, 3 months. And it was actually very interesting to see that people who were highly engaged with the program, so really willing to do the work, they show 3.5 times better leadership behaviors as an outcome than the peers who didn't engage that much. But on top of that, RJ, which was a huge benefit, they showed 7.5 times better well-being behaviors and experience. And so it's really a double win-win, basically. But in order to integrate it, it depends on the ask that we have. Sometimes organizations are open to it. We think it's most successful if you really bring it at the heart of the organization and the transformation that you want to achieve, because eventually you want this to be very sustainable, also for the journey that the organization is going into. But there is also a version where it's not organization-wide, but you just have individuals joining a program. And then the modules are quite standard, but the change happens then by the way we actually teach and take them through the program.
Michiel, what's the connection or relevance, if any, between meditation and mindfulness and deliberate calm?
Well, I mean, in the end, mindfulness is a lot about awareness in motion, I would say, right? If I'm going to make a distinction between meditation and mindfulness, I would say mindfulness is more awareness in action, whereas meditation, even though you have very dynamic forms of it, but let's just stick with the traditional way of meditating, you do it in a stable, quiet environment where you're not that much distracted, right? So in a way, meditation allows you to actually practice the awareness muscle. So I think the one goes really well with the other. If you meditate well, you practice the awareness muscle, observing your emotions, observing your thoughts in the quiet of a room or on your cushion. And then in mindfulness, it's actually meditation in motion, I would say. That's the way I frame it. And the two go together.
Because I would imagine that to kind of implement deliberate calm, I would start to need to get a grasp on my processes and my internal reactions real time, right? And if I never was practicing that, to be able to go from kind of nothing to then becoming aware or gaining this level of insight would be quite difficult. So that really helps, I think, guide the conversation into the next phase as to how do we start to develop skills to implement deliberate calm. So, Jackie, maybe I'll point to you this concept of learning agility. What is this?
So the concept of learning agility is really not only the aware, it brings together a lot of the things that we just spoke about. It's about the awareness of what is needed also in the moment, of course, but then keeping an open mind where if it's needed to change your behavior and the way of looking at the problem, that you are willing and able to do that. And agility has to do with a change of mindset, the pivoting of the mindset in the moment, but also the change of behavior in the moment. And through that, learning new ways of working, learning new ways of doing things, and adding behaviors to your repertoire that help you in the next time you come in a similar situation. So it really brings everything together in the moment. It is actually is a number one driver of leader success, which we found as well. But it is an open mind or a broad mindset is just one. We talk about different mindsets that you can use in the moment and looking at the situation in a different way. It is all about, instead of doing what you usually do in similar situations, if something else is required, you need to learn something new, then you need to adjust. And so instead of going left where you always go left, maybe it's now required to go right. And in order to go right, you need to do things differently, or you need to look at things differently, which requires this agility of the mind and also the behavior. And you cannot do that without being aware that you usually go left and what you usually do. So, in order to learn, you also need to set yourself up for success, requiring efforts. And also requires you most of the time to stay calm. Because if you don't stay calm, you spend a lot of energy on managing the emotions and the stress in the moment. And so that it's basically at the heart of this whole concept of adaptability and handling the situations that you may encounter that require a different approach.
In your opinion, can someone have a growth mindset and still be a perfectionist? You don't think perfectionism is a fixed mindset?
It can be. That's an interesting question, and I'm reflecting on it whilst we speak, RJ, because I'm assuming when you ask the question that there is a value statement behind it. But the perfectionist with that, I think it's basically having a high bar and wanting to do the things right and do them well. But I think you can have two types of perfectionists, maybe. The perfectionist that doesn't accept failure or making mistakes, that's more the fixed mindset. Versus wanting to do the right things and doing them well, whilst also having compassion for when you make a failure. That can still be that you strive for perfection, but you are okay if it's not achieved. So it's a bit philosophical, but you made me think there, so thank you.
I think you gave a really good answer. I mean, I think that high performers hold perfectionism and a growth mindset skillfully, right? They use failure or, they use regret as a tool, right? They don't get hung up on it though. Like, I think they use it as an enabler to ensure that they're pushing the bar and they're maintaining the bar. However, they don't get bogged down in it and cemented in it. And I think it's tricky.
I just wanted to get. I think this exactly what you said there is getting hooked and getting in acceptance and commitment therapy. We call it the getting fused with the identity or with this thing. Where if you can hold it lightly and with a lot of self-compassion, you can also go beyond it. Then they can be a powerful duo. But you always have to be honest to yourself when you cross the line. I'm certainly one that often goes in the danger zone. Myself.
Me too. I think there's always, this taps into the concept of identity, right? Like some say, don't, to kind of hold your identity light and loose. But I've also found identification and completely aligning with a sense of an identity is a very powerful enabler and driver. And so, when do you hold it light and when do you be utterly consumed with a sense of identity to the extent that it pushes you beyond what you thought was capable? These are tricky things to contemplate and to answer, but I suppose everyone has to do that for themselves and really be aware when they're moving into the danger zone.
But I think knowing and being aware of what your identity is already very powerful, right? Because when you're totally consumed by your identity, you're not aware that you're being consumed. You are your identity instead of you having an identity. And I think the part of the practice of this work is that you become more aware that you have an identity, but you are not your identity. And you can actually let go of it when it's needed, when something new is required. Because whether it's an identity or an opinion that's part of your identity or a conviction that's part of your past, it's all the same thing, right? They all create blind spots if you don't realize that they're part of something that you attach value to.
Yeah. Michiel, what's emotional self-regulation? How would you describe that? Because you guys have written that this is also another habit in terms of how we can build deliberate calm.
Yeah, I think emotional awareness and self-regulation, they go hand in hand, right? So the awareness is that you actually observe the emotions when they arise in you. And then the regulation is the skill that you don't get swept away by it. Right? So many high performers welcome anxiety before they go into a big performance arena, right? Whether it's a stage or a big speech or an important meeting, they kind of welcome the anxiety and they use it to their advantage. So they regulate their emotions towards a positive outcome. When you feel anger, because someone is doing something that you really not agree with. You can give into that and get into a huge fight, or you can actually use it to your advantage and connect with it without reacting, but choosing your response. So that's really it. It's the ability to choose your response because you are in touch with your emotion. If self-mastery leads to more and more awareness, I think it's very important, because if we don't do this as humanity, if we don't increase our level of awareness to the increased level of change around us, we put ourselves in deeper and deeper trouble. So we need leaders that pursue self-mastery. We need leaders that increase their awareness so they can actually be much better connected and aware of the change that is required in the world and in themselves.
Do you think like by implementing this stuff, we develop more ethical leaders?
No, I don't. That's not what I'm implying. I don't think that unawareness is unethical. I just think that unawareness leads to old answers to new problems, or simple answers to complex issues. So it's in the end, I do think you get to better outcomes for yourself and others if you act from a larger consciousness, a higher consciousness.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jackie, what's dual awareness?
Dual awareness is basically the awareness of the situation that you're in. So being aware of what the situation calls for in technical terms, and bringing it together with your internal awareness. So we use two terms that come close to this from neuroscience: interoception and exteroception. And often, we are not aware that we are responding, in a way we're led by emotions or swept away by whatever we feel in situations that require something else, and it requires us to pause. And in and of itself, asking yourself the question when you feel stressed and tense, what is actually asked from me right now in this situation, is already an emotion regulation technique, because it puts the spotlight on the situation rather than the spotlight on yourself. Bring them together, and it's always interactive, right? In the moment, there's new information coming in that impacts dynamic, basically. It impacts how you feel and how you respond, and then that goes on and on. But it asks you, it requires from you to check in with yourself and to continuously check in with the situation and integrating that information, because that helps you then to respond in the right way. And it sounds very technical. It sounds very like, wow, there's a whole protocol in order to do that. But that can happen in split seconds if you learn that.
A friend of mine tells me to kind of do the needful thing, right? Like, what's in front of me. And I think, I think it's important. And I think kind of bringing the right attitude and response to a situation. It's not always easy though, is it? When we're activated and when we're in kind of this fight or flight mode, particularly in a boardroom where we may feel threatened. We've got prestige, power, money, influence at stake. And it's not always easy, I suppose, for individuals, for all of us to be graceful under fire. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to get both of you on the show, because I think it's really important to be talking about this. And I think that, and I know that particularly the viewers and listeners at Ultra Habits are going to get a lot out of this conversation. I am going to start to land the plane now, Jackie, Michiel. But before we go, I kind of always ask my guests about habits and things they do that are personal to them. So maybe, Jackie, I'll ask you, what are a habit or two, or a couple things that you do that help you kind of weather the storm, that help you manage your anxiety, or just ultimately help you have a better life?
Well, I have quite a few, RJ, but I, for SOS moments, I strongly believe in breath work. So I know how to breathe, and I have different techniques. And there is a lot more that you can do physically also too. So what is important to emphasize, this is not a brain-only thing. Of course, the brain is steering the whole body, but it's important to become aware of that. And for me, it's breath work and movement. And as I told you before we started, I'm a bit jet lagged today, so that impacts also and the sharpness of our response. But it feeds into another habit. I try to sleep well. Yeah, it's a foundation to everything actually that follows.
Yeah, we actually had a startup, or a couple of the founders of the startup called Onda here in Australia last week, and the girl that founded the company, she's Icelandic, and it means breathes, and it's a product that monitors your breath, and it'll tell you during the day if you're not breathing properly, and it's aimed towards corporates. I think it's a pretty good product, because I think a lot of us in high tension, high impact situations, we just stop breathing. We just don't breathe. We don't breathe properly. Michiel, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think a couple of things. So what I'm doing, and it changes a bit over time, right? It's not always the same, but what I'm doing in the past period is every morning when I wake up, I indeed do breath work, the specific breath work, and then I get into the cold water. So I do the ice water. I have an ice cold pool outside, and I go in, and what I practice there is actually emotional self-regulation, because everything in my mind screams, get out of the cold water. But when I relax my body into it at will, all good juices start to flow, and I have a smile on my face for the rest of the day. So I think there's that part. And then the other thing, what I find important is to mix your commitments. When you have a very intense role, it's good to have something else besides it. So you're not too mono-focused and give your life to one thing only. So there could be friendships, it could be sports, it could be something that is important to you in addition to the sometimes all-consuming work life.
Yeah. No, that's a very good answer. We, Michiel, have not too far from me, a guy named Mark Pleuer, who's Australia's answer to Wim Hof. In fact, they're honest. And we go to his farm and we get into the cold. I do the ice plunge most mornings here. We have a workout. My friend has a gym up the road, and I live on a mountain, and there's about 6 or 7 of us, and we work out, and then we go into the sauna, and then we jump into the cold and go into the sauna. And I do too. I find the cold, there's nothing like it to kind of re-energize and rejuvenate. I've got little kids and I'm exhausted by 2 o'clock. I'll take a cold shower in the afternoon and I find just instantly I'm awake, but excellent advice, guys. So where can our audience learn more about the book and your work? Jackie, maybe I'll ask you, hand it over to you.
Yeah, sure. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll post a lot of things, and all the other publications that we have are on there. And they can find Deliberate Calm in any bookstore, Amazon, but also if they Google McKinsey Deliberate Calm, they'll find more information. There's a lot to be found everywhere.
Michiel, are you on social media? Are you on Instagram or TikTok?
Same thing. Only LinkedIn. I only do LinkedIn, trying to keep my sanity. And then, of course, the book is available everywhere, and people can contact me through LinkedIn.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.